Democracy in India is Indian style. It is noisy, it is colourful, it is at times sharply contested, but elections are democratic. Take our elections with which we are perennially involved. The last national elections 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, had 960 million registered voters, of which nearly 600 million cast their franchise in nearly 1 million polling booths. Most of the, to speed that piece up, unlike most democracies, we also use electronic voting machines and have been using them since 2003. No dimple chads for us. We're not only one of the first countries to deploy such systems, we're also an outlier in the exclusive use of EVMs in all elections. We, of course, produce winners and losers, as all elections do, but like in your case, there is full acceptance of the results. Outcomes have repeatedly led to the change of governments, and as we will see in 4 or 5 days from now, there will be transformations in the state governments as well. And of course, in India, we have a bicameral parliament with both houses being elected. There is more to democracy, of course, than merely elections, and I'm sure you will agree that there are institutions of democracy that are critical. We have an independent judiciary that has repeatedly exercised independence, not just in rulings, but also in the selection of its judges, a power that is vested in the collegium of judges and rather than in the government of the day. Put it simply, India is today the largest and most exciting economic opportunity in the world, along with what is happening in the broader Indo-Pacific. The macro figures first. We are already at a $3 trillion GDP and well on course to reach $4 trillion by the end of this year. It took us 67 years to get our GDP to 1 trillion, for the first 1 trillion. It took a further 8 years to move from 1 to 2 trillion. But the third and most recent $1 trillion addition took 5 years. And our GDP today is the 5th largest in the world. And modesty forbids emphasizing whom we just overtook. India is the fastest growing major economy today at the planet. It was 7.8% at the quarter that just ended. We set the pace not only this past year, but also before the pandemic. And if, as crime novels would tell us, it makes sense to follow the money, then the world is beating a path to India's door. The total FDI that India received since independence was 930 billion, but 530 billion of this reached in the last 8 years. And investment is being collected from 162 separate countries in 61 different sectors, a greater level of sectoral and nationality-based diversity than in any other country. Trade, of course, is also rising, and we have sought to expand our trade relationships, including through FTAs with Singapore, Korea, Japan, ASEAN, Australia, and the UAE. And we're working on an FTA with the UK, but also with the EU, EFTA, and GCC. But it isn't trade, ladies and gentlemen, that's driving growth. In actual fact, India's GDP growth is today driven by domestic demand, something similar that is happening in China. 67% of demand growth comes from domestic demand today. One of the major drivers of demand in India comes from the rise in consumption power of rural and peri-urban communities. If you don't believe me, just ask Lord Bamford and JCB. The extraordinary rise in the number of people buying backhoe loaders in tier 3 towns and villages is to be seen to be believed. It will remain so in India for the next few decades, as we currently have an average age of 28 years, and we are likely to maintain that age advantage for the next 4 decades. The youth today is driving the boom in entrepreneurship, and all of this is being now facilitated by a long overdue focus on infrastructure. Take, for example, metro railways. Our first subway was built in Kolkata in the mid-1980s, but it did not really drive an expansion of mass transit until the Delhi Metro in the late 1990s. Today, India has 15 cities with operational metro projects. The Delhi Metro has a route length of 350 kilometers with 230 stations, a punctuality rate of 99%, and here for you is the good bit. The profitable operation is set at 20 pence for 5 kilometers. Carriages the network in other cities is even cheaper, and newer networks in smaller towns in India run at 5 pence for a single journey. And we aim to secure a 7-fold growth in urban railways by 2047. The story is the same whether you look at railways and even the much derided Indian roadways. Infrastructure expenditure is considerable, and it is rapidly transforming to the green economy as we look to deploy solar power and electric power entirely on our railway network, thereby saving 7.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year, or in other words, 2 thermal power plants worth in emissions. Our current electrification rate, aimed at reaching 100%, is already at 80% in railways, and it compares favorably with France at 59% and the UK also.